Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer.
Balls Radio with Phil Dobbie.
Well, let's get back to that just very briefly and find out what the attitude in the US is towards Putin and all of this. Can you believe Sarah Palin, a woman who's not endowed with great intelligence, the woman who, let's put it in perspective, in terms of geography, she once described Africa as a country. Didn't seem to be aware of the fact that it might actually be a continent and made many other geographic gaffes. And yet, this woman says she predicted that this whole thing in the Ukraine would happen. In 2008, she said Obama's indecision and moral equivalence could result in Putin invading the Ukraine. Richard Kazimer, could Sarah Palin actually have been right?
Sarah Palin is the Chappelle Corby of American politics, Phil. This story is barely making a ripple over here. What the story is that the Teabag Party spokesmodel and clown princess, Sarah Palin, claims that she predicted Russia's invasion of the Ukraine back in 2008 when she unsuccessfully was running against Barack Obama as John McCain's vice presidential pick, which McCain cites as probably the single most worst political decision he ever made, was picking her as his vice presidential running mate. When she was running for VP, she opened her mouth, and aside from putting her foot in it, she said that if Barack Obama was elected, then Russia, having invaded Georgia, would then likely invade the Ukraine. The reality of it is that since she's dumber than a bag of rocks, her handlers gave her a bunch of talking points, very safe bets that...
I somehow assumed it didn't come straight from her own mind.
No, it didn't. So they gave her a bunch of talking points for foreign policy and listed a bunch of predictions that would have an either 50-50 chance of happening or not of some political hotbeds over in Eastern and Western Europe, and Russia being one of them. So she came up with that, and she's been riding this for the past couple of days, but nobody's picking up on it. It's just a joke. The important thing is that she predicted a Russian invasion. Now, as we do this, Russia has yet to invade the Ukraine, and if indeed they do, I mean, right, Putin is saying that he's protecting his interest by having a military force in the Crimea Peninsula right now.
Yeah.
But there is no invasion.
Yeah. Well, and you know, he says not just his interest, but he's protecting his people, he says. But look, you know, as I've said, the whole thing is very nuanced, and I certainly don't feel as though we're getting the full story here in the West. I'm not standing up for Russia in any way, but I don't feel as though necessarily in the Western press we're getting the full story.
No, and on this side of the pond as well, there's a lot of the usual saber rattling from Secretary of State John Kerry and Obama saying that there will be sanctions and whatnot, or there will be consequences. It still has to go through the UN if anything happens. I think, it's kind of tough to put a finger on the pulse of America because there isn't one collaborative voice. What we see and hear by politicians and the media is not representative of the American public. This is a non-voting issue if there's any sort of military action or we get involved with the UN, so nothing we can really do about it except sit back and watch the news. However, I think it's a safe bet to say that America is sick of war, especially the two that we haven't paid for,
and running out of money. That's right.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll be going over there anytime soon.
Well, certainly, what we don't want to have happen, of course, is something which erupts in the Ukraine, suddenly becomes a reason for America and Russia to suddenly reignite the Cold War, which the world certainly doesn't want to see happen.
No,
but. Hillary Clinton, 3,005, never mind Edward Snowden, 3,500 papers have been released telling you not very much about Hillary Clinton. So these are papers that are sort of systematically released, stuff that was protected all of a sudden can come into the public domain? Tell me what's happening here.
This past Friday, the National Archives made public 3,500 documents from the Clinton administration. Much of it just confirmed what a pivotal and influential force the then First Lady Hillary Clinton was to her husband's presidency. And it consists of notes, memos, transcripts, phone conversations, things like that. But it really showed what a hands-on person she was, and actually, fairly or not, earned the title of co-president. She had much more power than the vice president did. She rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, including Democrats and Republicans, but her record stands. Nobody was more vocal and more adamant about turning this country around and for the good of the country, since we were coming off of, when Bill Clinton was elected, another disastrous Republican administration. But she's such an advocate for education and women's rights and equality and the healthcare reform, which failed when she was doing it. But that was the litmus. That was pretty much the blueprint for what we have now is in the Affordable Care Act, which is Obamacare. So she did all of that. I understand, too, that she went on to become a successful senator from New York and Secretary of State under President Obama, who she lost in the 2008 election for president.
So she was no figurehead first lady. She was right there in the thick of it. I guess,
Absolutely not. She was probably the most important first lady, the most influential first lady, going back to Eleanor Roosevelt. She really did a lot of stuff. And in the early polls show, she has yet to announce whether she's going to run in 2016, but the early polls show that she is an odds-on favorite to being the next president.
Well, there we are. So Bill obviously thought, well, if you're doing all that work, that just frees a bit more time for me to fraternize with the interns a little bit.
I don't know what you're talking about, Phil.
Sure you do. And look, if she does stand for election in 2016, is this painting her in a more favorable light, or is it really just telling us what we knew already?
It's what we all knew anyway. It's just the National Archives. Every president, every administration, after a certain period of time, these documents are released. Both the White House, the Obama White House, and the Clinton people signed off on these documents. There was no smoking gun. There's nothing there that nobody didn't know before. So I think it's a good thing. People will look at her, and if you want to go back to these documents for any reason, there's pro and there's con in that, and it's how you want to spin it. People are going to say on the left are going to say what a strong person she is, what a strong leader she is, and people on the right are going to say that she's a bitch. Nothing
changes, and so the world goes around. Now, this week, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama were promoting a proposal by the Food and Drug Administration, saying that they wanted the portion sizes. It's the same here, the portion sizes that you see on food packaging that tells you how many calories and how much sugar and all that sort of stuff. The figures are lower because the portion sizes are smaller than most people eat. So the Food and Drug Administration now want that packaging to do a couple of things. First of all, they want the number of calories to be a big number, but they're also saying that they want the portion sizes to represent the size most Americans actually eat. Now, that I've been to a few American restaurants, so that size would be pretty large. That would be the whole bloody packet in many cases.
Don't confuse the portion sizes of packaged food to what you eat in restaurants. Right. I'm a culinary instructor as well in a lot of my incarnations, but in the franchise restaurants, the portion sizes are as large as they are because that restaurant can make a profit, right, giving the consumer large portions. What is in those portions is suspect.
Yes.
In a higher-end tablecloth restaurant, you're not getting huge portions for your money. So let's say if restaurant ABC, which is a franchise, can have these humongous portions and yet still make a profit, if you go to the upscale restaurant where there's only one of two of them in your area, they're going to give you a quality food at a high price, and you're going to be satisfied with it. So there is a difference between junk food, even in a sit-down restaurant that's a franchise,
yeah, sure,
and an upscale restaurant that's cooking from scratch.
Right.
In the packaging, though, let's say if you have a bag of chips or crackers or something, it'll say suggested portion size, 12 crackers per person. They're going to change that now to go up or down, however they're going to do it based on the caloric content and also the sugar, which is another thing. It's not just a caloric content now. For the first time since the 1970s, they're going to be listing the sugar content, which is one of the major causes of obesity in this country, not fat or trans fat.
No,
so
and that's
an important thing.
And that's always the thing. I mean, when you look at low-fat food, very often you look like low-fat yogurt. Look at the sugar levels on those things. Often the sugar level is higher in the low-fat product than it is in the high, the normal product. So that's a good move. But is it going to make any difference? I suspect not, because we've had food packaging for a long time that's telling us a lot of that information. We've still got the issue, and I think it's about the same in Australia as it is in America. About a third of the population is obese. I don't think people are looking at these labels somehow.
Last week, the Journal of American Medicine released a report that shows obesity rates in children 2 to 5 years old have decreased significantly over the past decade.
Okay.
So it's down 43%.
Encouraging.
For children 2 to 5 years old. And that's a really good thing, because if you catch the children early, they will then, if you have an obese child that's between 2 and 5, if a child is grossly overweight by 5 years old, chances are they are going to be obese as an adult.
Yeah.
This is very, very important too. Getting back to that sugar thing, back in the 70s, there was a group of medical professionals that came out and said sugar was the cause, and another group that came out and said fat was the cause. The fatties won out. So we had this big push to take saturated fat and trans fat out of food. However, fat is good. Fat has purpose. Fat has taste. By taking that out, food manufacturers had to replace it with something. They replaced it with sugar, and the obesity rates spiked.
Right, didn't realize you were quite such a foodie. I'll bear that in mind next time I ask questions about food. Expect a very long answer. By the way, just before we move off food, the Brits might have the answer. Seaweed, they reckon. Researchers at Newcastle University reckon that certain types of seaweed stop the fat breaking down and getting into your system. So if you eat this seaweed, put it on your Big Mac, or add it to your cakes, then you're not going to have the same problem. So there we are. That might be the answer. Now, Richard Kazimer, what time is it with you? Is it really the 21st century, like it is everywhere else? Because I'm looking at this story from Walt Disney World in Florida, deciding to withdraw its support from the Boy Scouts of America because the Boy Scout movement is banning gay leaders.
The leaders. Last year, the Scouts came out and allowed gay scouts, but they're still not allowing gay scout leaders, which is bizarre, because what that does is it further perpetuates the false stigma of any correlation between homosexuality and pedophilia, when in fact pedophiles are predominantly heterosexual.
Yeah.
What the ever wholesome Walt Disney Company did was that they're pulling any funding to the Boy Scouts starting next year because of that policy against gay scout leaders. Now, Disney and a lot of corporations don't give money directly to the Boy Scouts of America. What Disney does is they have an offshoot program called Volunteers, and that allows their employees to go out and do volunteer work in exchange for cash donations. So the volunteers, ears as in Mickey Mouse's ears, they can go back to Disney and say, I've done this work for them, and submit this funding that will then go back to the Scouts. Now Disney is saying the Boy Scouts of America is off the list of being eligible for any sort of volunteer stipends because of their policy, which I think is a good thing, considering that for many, many years, Disney World and Disneyland wouldn't let in hippies, people with visible tattoos. And now they're coming around because, gays and people from all walks of life go to Disney, and it's a big business. So good for them.
Yeah, absolutely good for them. And I wonder whether the Boy Scout movement is going to change its approach or not.
I think it will have to in order to exist. Down south, there are some groups that have actually pulled their kids from the Scouts and started their own anti-gay Scouts, so everybody can do whatever they want. But I think in order to survive, in order to actually, come into the 21st century, they do need to change their policy. And again, it doesn't make sense. It does. If you've got gay Scouts, why not have gay Scout leaders as people to look up to and people to teach these young boys? It just doesn't make any sense.
It certainly doesn't make any sense. It is exactly like saying, look, we don't want our kids to get fat, so therefore we don't want fat leaders. Or we don't want people with curly hair. It's the same form of discrimination. It makes no sense whatsoever. But anyway, the world is a strange place at times. Richard Kazimer, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Phil. Take care.
Balls Radio with Phil Dobbie.